me just introduce you to our panelists who've joined us on stage to talk about the future of energy. Amjad Bseisu is with us, the CEO of EnQuest, a leading UK independent gas and oil company. Tejpreet Singh Chopra, who is the founder and CEO of Bharat Light and Power, BLP. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Big questions around energy security, at least short term. Can we talk about this first up, the fast action we've seen in Europe to try and replace Russian energy sources? We've had a warmer winter so far, so it feels as though we've avoided a crisis situation, a crunch on energy. Are we through the worst of it? Are we through the woods in terms of energy security now in Europe?
I think we are through the worst of it. We have been diligent, but also lucky and I think resilient in terms of the approach. So I think everybody moved quickly to try and secure energy. We were lucky that China, I mean, there was a move of Russian oil to China using their coal, so it released almost 40 BCM of LNG, which was very good for the UK and the EU in terms of buying spot LNG. We did have to pay up. Prices went up to almost 350 euros a megawatt hour and almost $100 per equivalent at peak. But we were able to be probably at record level for January, 84% of storage in gas, which is exceptionally high. So I think we've been able to avert a major problem. Next year, we are more ready. The terminals, two terminals in Germany have been set. There's an additional one coming. There's capacity that's expanded in the UK. So I think LNG will become a bigger part of the replacement of Russia. Russia did supply gas this year, but next year there's a question mark. There's only one pipeline left now. There are two pipelines that have service commission. But so I think there is a risk that could shut off. It's through Ukraine as a pipeline as a risk. So we shouldn't be relaxing. We should still be diligent for next year. I think this year is good, but I'm hopeful that the challenge will be more reasonable next year.
Tejpreet, let me get you in on the situation right now. Do you think we've averted an energy crisis for now?
Karen, I completely agree with Amjad that in the short term we have. I still am a bit more concerned about next year. The energy cycle is a long-term investment business. You need to take years to build more capacity, whether it's in gas, renewables, thermal, nuclear, all that takes time. And my concern is that we're all running a race against time to ensure we can get all that capacity up and running in the next 12, 18 months. So I don't think it's going to be that easy. I think it's going to be a bit difficult. Whereas what I'll just say from my part of the world in Asia and India, I think we've been taking a more pragmatic approach, given the fact that we need to secure our energy sources for over 1 billion people. So I think our government has taken a very pragmatic approach towards our energy situation.
I want to pivot to the energy systems we are creating for the future, because as we reinvent energy systems in Europe, stripping out Russian sources of gas and oil to punish Putin for this war in Ukraine, is there a risk that we're now relying on too heavily on other countries to step in and fill the gap?
I mean, one of the risks is that we have a system which is, number one, still very fossil fuel dependent, even with the decreases that we have put in place. And it's also dependent on few sources of gas, LNG, piped gas and LNG. Piped gas comes mostly from Russia now, Norway and Algeria. Russia will be shut off. And then even with the LNG availability, it's really the US and Qatar that have the excess availability. And then not only that, it's the routes that we also have to worry about, because the routes can also become challenged over time. We see that with the routes through Ukraine. So it's more than one challenge, but as long as, again, we continue to make sure we have excess capacity and storage, I think we can solve the problem.
Tejpreet, there's been a stampede for new sources of energy, whether it's from other countries that were not traditional suppliers or not suppliers in a big manner, but also for renewables to fill the gap. What mistakes do we need to avoid as we create a resilient energy system of the future?
Yeah, I think the couple of key mistakes that we need to avoid, Karen, is one, we cannot afford to move in only one direction. We've got to hedge our bets. We've got to look at a more holistic picture. I think what this energy crisis has showed was that over the last few years, a lot of European countries shut down their nuclear plants. I think now in this crisis, we are trying to get those back up again. So I think we all around the world have learned that we need to take a more pragmatic approach. Two, we need to take a holistic approach. It's not only about nuclear or gas or thermal. Renewables is going to play a critical role. thermal will play a critical role, gas and nuclear as well. So I think that's been the big learning. There are other challenges that we will face in this space. Just to share with you, in India, we have close to about 160 gigawatts of renewable capacity today, about 60 gigawatts of solar and 40 gigawatts of wind. So it's been a phenomenal story, and I think we plan to get up to 500 gigawatts. But at the same time, the investments are going into natural gas, into the pipeline for natural gas. There's a huge focus on putting more refinery capacity up. So I think it has to be a holistic approach to get around the energy crisis.
Amjad, do you want to come back in on this as we talk about resilience in these systems we're creating, whether it's from renewables matched against traditional sources of energy?
The velocity of change is the key, and there's no question about the change, and the velocity of change is the key. Moving away from fossil fuels to renewable energy, I think, is something we're all on the path of. As a company, we have repurposed our terminal to look at CO2 sequestration, take carbon dioxide liquid, and then pump it, and we're applying for licenses for carbon capture and storage. So we're all on that journey. The question is how long the journey is going to take, and how prepared are we to take that journey? And I think the journey is one of evolution, not revolution. We will, by any measure, by IEA, EIA, continue to use growth in gas into the 2040s. So that's going to still be a proponent of a future. Oil will have a shorter time. Maybe the average looks at somewhere in the 2030s. And then coal is the one that has come back into the fore, and that had a much shorter life. So we have to think about how we message the investments in accordance with what we want to get out of our energy security.
There's been a lot of criticism about the ongoing use and reliance on fossil fuels just to fulfill energy security at this point. The promise of new technology, carbon capture, for instance, and other technologies, is that just allowing us to continue relying on fossil fuels, even though we're still a long way away from this technology coming in critical mass to make a difference?
So I think the technology for capturing and injecting carbon dioxide is there, and it needs to be commercially attractive. In the US, it's already commercially attractive with this Inflation Reduction Act. In Europe and in the UK, I think there are some projects that are in play and in motion, and so I think that technology is there. However, the big issue is about baseload power. Our baseload power needs to be two forms of renewable, so nuclear or hydro or thermal, which is baseload, and otherwise it's fossil fuel. Wind and solar today cannot be baseload because they require storage. And today, storage costs of electricity, all kind of electricity, is a multiple. It's 100, 1,000 times the storage costs of fossil fuels. And until and unless we crack that technology, then I think we'll still be relying on baseload and continuing to rely on the other sources of energy, including nuclear, including, as TP said, I mean, that's important. We've been reducing that. We should think about increasing it as baseload. Because I think the reason we got into this bind in this cycle is because of the wind also being low. Some of the nuclear out of France was down. So we just need to understand the baseload and make sure we have that available.
Tejpreet?
No, I completely agree. I think at the end of the day, let's look at the problem from a supply side and the demand side. On the supply side, we talked about all the things that countries are doing right now for resilience. But one of the big challenges I see, Karen, is the fact that in order to achieve these goals, one of the good things that we've seen all around the world is the cost of renewable energy has come down dramatically over the last 7-8 years. Let me give you an example. In India, the cost of solar energy 7-8 years ago was about 30 US cents a kilowatt hour. Today, it's about 3. The cost of wind used to be about 10 to 15. It's about, again, 2 to 3 US cents. So with that dramatic decline in the cost of energy, which is fantastic, and that's what resulted in this dramatic growth. But at the end of the day, when you really take a step back, capital goes to where the returns are. And that's one of the challenges all of us are going to have, is that in this new energy mix, where is the capital going to go, both from a supply side and the demand side? The other thing we need to consider is the fact that on the demand side, we need to start focusing on energy efficiency as well. Can we use AI technologies to drive energy efficiency? Can we use AI to drive uptime in machines. So I think that's going to be another big shift, is to use AI and ML technologies to drive the efficiencies on the demand side as well. So I think that's what we're going to see. And the last point is on technology. The jury is going to be out as to which is going to be the right technology, whether it's going to be hydrogen, whether it's going to be lithium, whether it's going to be EV, and how all this is going to fit out. But it goes back to economics drives scale, economic drives progress. So it's going to be a very, very interesting time over the next 10 years to see which technology pans out.
Can you comment on the storage aspect too? Amjad just encapsulated the problem still with renewable storage. How do you conquer that challenge? What are you seeing that encourages you that we are getting to a point where there is a storage solution?
Yeah, Karen, there's so many startups all around the world trying to crack the cost of energy for storage. And it's different because different technologies, different chemistries are coming up around the world. And we see a lot of this happening every day. But I go back again, at the end of the day, the technology that wins will be the one that can get the right cost economics. And I think that's going to be the big one. And two, how do you develop the scale we need to get down to those cost economics? What gets me excited about the whole EV revolution is that for the first time in history, you have automotive sector and the energy sector combined. I just came from another session right now where airports are talking about how do they become sustainable. We had a session where airlines have to figure out how to become more sustainable. So it's a really interesting time in the period of our lives where different technologies, different transportation sectors are all trying to come around the theme of sustainability. And the reason I bring that up is that will help us drive scale. So the same EV technology that goes into, storage technology that goes into EV could help us get the cost down for energy storage. Even though it may not be the right technology, but the scale we get on automotive could help us in the energy space. Biofuels in aviation could help in some other areas as well. So it's going to be a very interesting time over the next 10 years as all these different things come together.
I want to dig a little deeper into the demand and pricing environment for energy this year because it's been a huge distraction in recent years. We're going into what seems to be a slower economic year. We've got higher interest rates still, which is impacting the availability of credit. And we've got this reopening theme on the other side from China. How do you view the oil and gas pricing story this year?
So there are factors which are concerning. Number one, China last year, 2022, was the lowest in many. The growth was actually the lowest since they've started taking records. It was 10 million barrels a day, which is still a lot. But it's significantly down on what it was in the past. It was 14 million barrels a day in 2020 in the COVID time, so almost 4 million barrels a day lower. Given that in 2020 there was some storage and China took advantage of the lower costs. So in December it's about 11 million barrels a day. So there has been already an increase from the base load over the last year. So with China reopening, I think an acceleration would come back. We're still going to see a muted response, not the growth that we've seen in the past, but still significant enough to go from the 10 million level. So there will be China. The SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in the US, has been depleted by almost 220 million barrels last year, 600,000 barrels a day equivalent per day. And then Russia, the juxtaposition of the Russian crudes and the sanctions will create a longer journey for crude, as has been going on to India, to China. The journeys of 40 days, 40, 50 days, rather than 10 or 20 days by pipeline or by into Europe. So that will also require higher oil working capital for those transportation journeys. So I do see a constructive price environment, and then there's also this the Biden put concept where Biden has said if it gets closer to the 70s, it will be there. I want to go back to how do we solve for this issue when the technology is yet to be there? The technology for CO2 is there. We have reduced in the UK. The UK has actually, of all the industrialized countries, the UK has reduced its emissions by 42% from 1990. So it's the largest single country, industrialized country, that's reduced its emissions. And that's been by substitution of coal to gas mostly, and renewables. I mean, the UK does 40% renewables in last year, so it's still a significant amount of renewables. But I think the CO2 capture and sequestration, which is within technological reach and where it exists, where we have the technology to be able to apply it, it's being applied already in the US, is one where we can start letting letting the capitalist market solve the problem rather than trying to institute policy holding or policy makers to make the solution themselves. Because I do believe the efficiency of capital markets and the efficiency of private capital will always be a better way to solve these problems.
Well, as we talk about the supply and demand dynamics, it feels as though this year might be a story where we switch more to the focus on demand. Just how strongly is demand holding up? Is it coming back because of the China story? What is your view on the volatility, the pricing action we'll see in energy, whether that's from traditional sources and how that impacts renewables this year?
Yeah, I think the very interesting thing, Karen, that we've achieved over the last 10 years, making it very, very competitive with other forms of energy. So it's so funny, 10 years ago when the whole renewable cycle was going up, the debate was exactly the opposite. Can renewable energy compete with other sources of energy? Now it's the other way around, where renewable energy is significantly cheaper than other forms of energy. So it's amazing how in literally about 8 to 10 years, the whole world has changed. Let me share with you another example, Karen. My first solar farm, the cost of solar panels was $6 a watt peak. Till about 2.5 years ago, it had come down to 19 cents a watt peak, and now it's gone up again because of certain volatility conditions to about 30, 35 cents. But that just shows I don't know too many other industries in the world which have seen such a dramatic decline in the cost of technology in such a short period of time. So that gives me a lot of hope that this whole shift in energy transition is real, it's happening, and it's going to benefit a lot of us. Now, going back to your point on how it's going to have an impact on other technologies, other energy sources, I think the world will need more energy. There's no doubt about it. I think the need for energy is going to double. Just to share with you, in India, natural gas requirement is going to go from 64 BCM to about 130 by 2030. We're building up a big gas grid that's going to go from 22,000 kilometers to 35,000 kilometers over the next few years. So I think it's that integrated approach to mitigate price volatility, to ensure we have supply, to ensure we can supply the energy sources for our growth. So that's what's happening around the world.
So solar, wind prices for 2023, where do you see them going?
Yeah, I think it's already come down to a level which is so low. I'll be really surprised if it goes any lower. There are a few situations. You hear stories of in Texas, some of the utilities giving away wind energy for free because the supply demand was so out of whack. So I think these are the kinds of challenges we're going to have with intermittent power like wind and solar. You can't control nature, and that's where storage comes in. So I think storage is still some time away where you can then balance loads and ensure that you can give the right pricing. But until then, we're going to have these swings of volatility because it's intermittent power.
Amjad, a moment ago you were talking about market mechanisms for the sector, but we know fiscal policy has had some weight and some impact in recent times. As we talk about these windfall taxes, when do you think they start to get rolled back? How long are they going to linger for?
I mean, the UK and the EU have instituted some form of this tax. The UK is twice now. I mean, I'm hoping that we've had a difficult year where we had a cap on electricity for households in the UK, and that has cost the Treasury significantly. Now, with the prices coming down and abating, and both in Europe and the UK below the targets that have been set, I'm hoping that the impetus for investment and the impetus for putting gas and oil in place for this transition period will become more important. And the energy security angle needs to be kind of reviewed again in light of trying to have industry that can generate local industry, at least in the time where we need the renewables in the transition. Again, I was involved in Enviromina, where in 2007 we started the first solar in MENA region, and we built plants all around, and I was the chairman there and was involved for 12 years. And it was remarkable, the price decrease. But where we had to put baseload power, the cost went up. Similar to Tejpreet, we had started the first plant at almost 30 cents a kilowatt hour. The last one was almost 2.3, so very significant decline. The issue was when you had to put storage, it went up to like 70, 75 cents, which was high, at least for the developing countries there. So I think that's still a challenge. I think the baseload is one thing that we need to look at and continue to navigate. Digitization and optimization is a solution. I think you see pricing in the UK of electricity. Sometimes it's peak pricing is 50% plus. And if you have smart heaters, if you have smart water heaters, they can actually access electricity when it's lower price and heat the water or heat the house. I think we'll get some additional efficiency there.
This is a counterweight argument as to why there shouldn't be taxes lobbed on the industry. Any indication, though, that the Rishi Sunak government will pull back on these taxes, that rational approach will prevail because of the investment side? Or do you think it's the government that says, look, this is a new source of revenue. We have a very long list of demands of things that require government spending. Let's just keep them for a little bit longer.
I'm hopeful that again, there was a gap, and I think that gap needed to be addressed. There was also a cap on prices, and the government needed to look at funding. It's both electricity generators now that have the cap and will pay profits above that, as well as energy producers. So I'm hopeful that there will be some discussions in the coming year as things abate, and that we want to, increasing taxes clearly doesn't increase investments. It's just the correlation is, and also having fiscal instability doesn't allow you to have long-term investments. So I do think that the UK needs to look at long-term investment horizons and attract capital that will want to invest long-term. And fiscal instability doesn't bring that.
Tejpreet, I'm curious about your view on windfall taxes, because on the one hand, you were just talking about the attractiveness of renewables versus traditional energy sources. No doubt taxes play a role too in that pricing mechanism. But on the other hand, as we talk about the lack of investment going into new sources like renewables, we know that oil majors could be a ready source of investment income, of capital. So how are you thinking about these windfall taxes? Do you want them to disappear pretty soon, or do you think they should stay?
Yeah, Karen, let me come from this to your question from another angle. At the end of the day, consumers will drive what industry to some extent does, right? If the market and the consumers say we want X kind of energy, that's kind of reaction that we would need to do. So I think that's going to be the push. So the significant push on ESG and sustainability is going to drive a lot of the decisions. So that's number one. But then it comes back to your fundamental question. Are the consumers willing to pay for what they want? Right? Is the consumer willing to pay an extra premium because he wants clean energy? And if there is a requirement, are they willing to pay? And therefore, I just feel that that's what the pressure the governments are facing, is that what are those regulatory interventions they need to make to be able to provide the consumer what they want? And that's the dynamic and the pushes and pulls that everybody's having. I think at the end of the day, what I'm quite happy about is that the cost of energy has come down to a point. I tell everybody, you can't scale until you get cost economics. It's not a sustainable solution to have a tax for long term. That's not market dynamics at play. So my personal take is I'm hopeful that in the next near future, the cost of energy stabilizes so that you don't have to worry about putting these taxes. However, let me also say this, that I tell everybody that it's better for companies to drive the agenda, take the initiative to say, I want to create, clean aviation or clean fuel or clean transportation. Take that step forward and say, we will set the agenda to set up green aviations, for example. Because then what happens is you're able to take the initiative so that you don't let the regulators tell you what you need to do. So I think that's going to be the big push to industries around the world to take that step forward, to set the mandate of what the agenda needs to be so that the regulators don't do it for you. So I think that's what it. One last point, Karen, in this whole energy thing we talk about. The grid has to be scaled up across the world to manage different kinds of energy, wind, solar, base load. And that's going to be another big initiative or big push that countries have to start thinking about, is how do you strengthen grids around the world for this new energy world we are entering.
Amjad, you just want to weigh in on this about the new technology opportunities that exist by changing energy systems as we know them to be today?
The first thing I just want to add a point. I do worry about the availability of bandwidth for renewables. And if you look at the projects, mostly wind, that are in place, it's almost 500% more over the next 10 years than what the capacity is today. So there needs to be a significant scale up in capacity. There's also an issue about, the prices have come down for wind and for solar to the, I guess IRENA talks about 4 cents or 4 cents a kilowatt hour and 2 cents a kilowatt hour for solar, 4 for wind in terms of average prices around the world. But I do worry about supply chain and areas of the supply chain that could be challenged in the future. We've seen inflation. We're seeing China as a prominent, not necessarily producer but refiner of a lot of these and processor of a lot of these elements and minerals that are needed for new energy. And I think that's going to be a choke point there too.
I want to round out on the geopolitics. If the war in Ukraine got magically solved, there was a negotiated solution this year, how would that change the geopolitics around energy markets? Amjad, do you want to take that?
Yeah, well, I think so. There is an emerging, obviously, the bipolar world with China and in the US, and I think we will see. We've gone from a globalization to a fractionalization, with really Russia being a nuclear power, but not a superpower economically, and China being the emerging power. So I see that's probably the narrative that I see as the narrative over the next decades between what's restricted from the open markets, between what has been a completely open market between the US, China, and generally the world, to more fractionalized markets between the US and China, primarily Europe. It's really G2 and G7 plus. So G7, we used to be G9, now it's G2, and then the G7 plus with a lot of the world being more non-aligned, including India, which kind of serves the purpose of what we were probably when we had the Soviet Union and the US in a bipolar world.
And Tejpreet, just a final word from you on this, because it is fascinating seeing India navigate the geopolitics because of energy security for decades. As we talk more broadly about emerging markets, trade balances have been impacted because of huge import requirements on energy. With the renewables path that you see your own country on, how does it change the geopolitics down the track for India and other emerging markets?
I think this crisis has shown, Karen, that at the end of the day, we have over 1 billion people in India. And we have to take the matter into our hands to give energy to our 1 billion people. So I think we need to take a more practical approach, and that's what we've done, to sort of balance the fact that we need energy. We're a huge consumer of energy, and therefore we need to take that practical approach and get energy from different sources to keep that whole cycle going. But it's a very, very complex question that you've just asked, and it's not an easy answer. But I think at the end of the day, the development of your nation is key. We need to focus on that within the confines of what's happening. But what I'd just like to say, Karen, at the end of the day, the transition that's happening around the world in energy is a shared responsibility amongst everybody, between corporates, governments, people, industries. All of us have to come together to make this happen. And I'm super excited and optimistic when I look around the world and I see all the stakeholders finally coming together to make this happen. Oil and gas companies investing big in new technologies for clean energy, like CCS that you mentioned, Amjad. It's an exciting shift that's happening. A lot of oil and gas companies putting more renewable investments. So I'm really excited to see that this transition happening in the right direction.
Gentlemen, we have to wrap it up. Thank you so much for tackling the topic with us. We do appreciate your time. Amjad Bseisu, the CEO of EnQuest, on stage with us. Tejpreet Singh Chopra, who is the founder and CEO of Bharat Light and Power, BLP. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Karen.